What's up, familia? This is Jeph Loeb, and welcome to the Power of X-Men.
I'm the Uncanny Dayspring.
I'm the Adjectiveless Blinkman.
And we have met the maker himself, Jeph Loeb, telling us how our God King Nate Gray was created. I'm flabbergasted.
This is pretty insane. I mean, he's not only, the maker of God King Nate Gray, he's done so much outside of comics, and this was a great opportunity. I really truly loved this one.
We didn't even need to ask any questions.
No.
We just asked one question. He read the outline. Familia at home, we spend so much time putting together outlines for these episodes, and we send them off. And listen, no shade to anyone who's ever been on Power of X-Men, but sometimes you get the feel that no one's ever really looked at the outline.
Yeah.
Jeph Loeb looked at the outline, had everything ready. We didn't need to say anything in this. We just needed to ask the creator one question, and he knew everything. He knew every beat we wanted to ask.
You just got to sit back and enjoy a legend, speak on his time in the X office at the height of things. Those early to mid 90s era, there's no other era in comics is like that. So to get that sort of inside scoop from somebody who was there and in the mix with all of these people, all of these creators that we love, this was special. My mind is blown.
Can I be like a total asshole for once? I'm gonna drop everything.
For once, yeah.
For once. The amount of shade I get about Nate Gray all the time, and to hear Jeph Loeb say that this book, issue 1 of X-Men, sold 800,000 copies. I literally, Familia, when you listen to this interview, I'm going to be like, I'm sorry, can you please repeat that again for everyone in the back? That is how popular and awesome Nate was.
Well, and I think the thing is I think there's a lot of fans, and no shade to anybody. Everybody, no matter how long you've been in comics, that's you're a fan, you're a real fan. But I think that there's a lot of people that criticize Nate. They weren't there for the phenomenon of it. They weren't there. They maybe weren't as tuned into comics at that point, or maybe not even born. But the impact that the Age of Apocalypse, and specifically the young solo teen male character to fans of a certain age, it was mind-blowing stuff. So if you weren't there, you might not know. And of course, you'll hear in this interview that Jeff's original vision wasn't for this to be a 75 issue series. So maybe it did peter out towards the end there, but for those first dozen, however many issues where Jeph was writing it, it was an event comic. There was some really interesting things happening, and if all you have is hindsight on that, you don't have the lived experience, then yeah, you're going to talk shit about Nate. But like I said, for fans of a certain age, Nate is our boy.
We also get into his era in X-Force. You had lots of questions, especially about the purple and gold costumes, which are quite iconic. And we did ask a red button issue, which I think the Familia is really going to enjoy. We got into Ultimatum. Can I tell you something? When I was like, oh, let me just ask the Ultimatum question, and that was a listener question that came in, I forgot what a red button issue it was until Jeph said that. So if you look at the video, my eyes kind of widened. I was like, oh shit. Yeah. And I even when we're talking, I was like, no, I read this. I'm not one of those people who are just angry. I read this as it was happening. I thought it was a fun read, but I forgot what a red button, to Jeff's point, what a red button issue Ultimatum was.
Oh yeah, you couldn't go on the message boards or without somebody complaining about Ultimatum at that point. And that's what event comics are meant to do. They're supposed to get people talking. They're supposed to stir up interest, and Ultimatum certainly did that. That was a very specific time in fandom. I think that's sort of when you have to feel a little bit for Jeph, because that was when Twitter was at its, on the rise. Everybody was able to just sort of express their opinions on things, and get in creators' faces virtually. So I remember it being that hot button issue, but I thought it was an interesting read. It was just a fun widescreen action disaster comic, and not everything.
Disaster. That's it. That's all it was.
It was the day after tomorrow in comic book form.
Oh my God, I was going to say that, but I couldn't remember when Day After Tomorrow came. Jake Gyllenhaal's press for that movie, I love. That's when I became obsessed with Original Penguin. That because he did the GQ cover with the red shirt for promoting that movie. Chef's kiss. So, Familia, we are honored to have a legend with us today. It is Jeph Loeb. He has written for Marvel and DC, and his credits include Batman: The Long Halloween, and he's written for TV shows like Smallville, Heroes, and he was head of Marvel TV, and that's why we have Daredevil and Jessica Jones. But really, this is an interview about how Nate Gray and the Age of Apocalypse was created, and a peek behind what was going on in the Marvel editorial office at that time.
Yeah, it spills all the tea. No drop of tea left unspilled. This is. I feel far more informed about how things were going behind the scenes at Marvel in those days.
It is scalding hot tea, and I am going to quote something that he said. It is out of context, but once you hear the interview, it'll make a little bit more sense. So don't get too mad yet, Familia. But he literally said at one point, Madelyne Pryor, the clone, who cares about Madelyne Pryor? And I saw Flink's face, and Flink was raising his hand.
I care.
But it's interesting the role that Bob Harris played in a lot, and Jeph does not hold back. And so the tea is very scalding.
But I will say he does give so much credit to Scott Lobdell, who is, of course, a friend of the podcast, and who, we have a lot of love and respect for the Scott Lobdell era. It's amazing to hear that he was an excellent collaborator, someone who was always there to help. This is a great interview. We covered so many different topics that are near and dear to longtime X-Men fans' hearts, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
Let's hit play. I cannot believe that we have Jeph Loeb himself on the podcast today. Flink, I am fanboying out right now.
You have done a little bit of everything that I love. You've done X-Men comic books. You've produced television shows that I love. You've done all sorts of incredible things. I'm just so excited that you're here. Thanks for taking the time.
Well, thank you guys for inviting me. It's always fun to talk about things that I did 30 years ago.
It's just we had a bit of a laugh about this when we talked about interviewing you. You're like, you've done some like major things, on television and in Hollywood, and here we are, the two X nerds, going to ask you about the minutia of, like you said, 30 years ago. It's this is what we do.
Oh, it's just fantastic. Look, I like supporting guys like yourself. And,
well, I appreciate it.
Let's have fun.
Your work has influenced us so much over the course of our lives, starting with Age of Apocalypse. And there's so many rumors out there about Age of Apocalypse and how it got started. Could you help clear the air? What was your perspective on how Age of Apocalypse came about?
Well, I can't really clear the air. I can only tell you from my perspective. And I'm sure that if you spoke to the other 19 people that were involved, they would have their own story. I think we have to go back a little bit to how I got involved in the X-Men office in the first place. Tim Sale and I had done the first Halloween special. And at the time, it's like 93, I think. It was also the first comic that was sold for I think it was $6.95. It might have been $7.95. Which I just thought was DC's way of saying, if there's any way that we can kill this book, we'll just put a price point that no one's going to actually do anything about. And it sold really well, like embarrassingly well. Like if you sold those numbers today, you'd be the book of the year, which is important because we're going to get to sales later in the story. So I remember exactly where I was. I was in my writing office, and the phone rang. This is several months after the Halloween special had come out, and a woman named Lisa Patrick, who is no longer at Marvel. She went from there to MTV, and then I don't know where she is in the world. Called and said, "Hi, I'm Lisa Patrick. I work for Marvel Comics. And I wanted to know whether or not you were interested in working on the X-Men." And you have to understand, at the time, the working on the X-Men was like being, if you're a baseball fan, being with the Yankees. And I'm not talking about just the Yankees. I'm talking about like Babe Ruth era, Murderers Row Yankees.
Yeah.
And I'm first and foremost a geek. So like my reaction was, who is this really? And I literally hung up on her. And she called back about 5 minutes later, and she said, "Listen, I'll tell you what. Let me give you my phone number here at Marvel, and you can call me." Because the only person that I ever heard about working in the X-Men office was Bob Harris. So I didn't realize that there were subdivisions and other people along the way. So I called back, and they answered the phone, Marvel, and then I asked if Lisa Patrick worked there, and they said yes. And so I got on the phone with her, and she said, "I'm going to ask you again, are you interested in working in the X-Men?" And I said, "Well, okay, but," and this was my sort of arrogance of youth. It was something that I said a lot at the time, and I really regret, which was, "But you have to understand, I have a real job." Like I at the time I was working in television and movies, and like comics were fun, but like I literally my entire resume was Challengers of the Unknown, which was an 8-part critical success, but it did lead me to meet Tim Sale, and everything that I've gotten in comics is because of Tim. And then one Batman special. So I was like, how do you even know I exist in the world of comics? And so she said, "Look, I have to ask you 3 questions before we go any further." And I said, "Sure." She said, "Well, do you like the X-Men?" I said, "Yeah, I do." She said, "Would you be interested in writing on the X-Men?" And I said, "Yeah, I mean, sure." And she then said, "Do you know what it's like to work in the X-Men office?" And I should have then known what we currently refer to as a red flag, that is a red flag. And so we're going to get a little bitchy today. I'm not going to tell you that I'm not. It was not a happy time.
Stop it. Bring the tea. Bring the tea, Jeph Loeb.
We want to know all.
And I just want you to know that everyone in that office was the most amazing human being that ever walked the planet. And Satan himself was Bob Harris for whatever reason. And it may be just because Bob needed to be that way in order to run the most powerful comic group that was selling 1 million copies a month. Or that's Bob. I don't know. I haven't seen Bob in 30 years, could not care less. But I can tell you that at the time, and by the way, I will take my role in this, in that I was an arrogant little pisher, if you know the word from Yiddish. And if you don't, look it up. And so we were that all the time. And so people like Lisa Patrick and the great Mark Powers, by the way, Mark Powers is still in the comic business and a great editor and a great friend, uh, had to put up with me all the time. So I constantly created hilarious problems. But the book sold well, so it was not. It was much more of dealing with me than okay, we got to get rid of this guy. And so uh, she then said, "Look, here's the situation. Um, we are uh, publishing a book called Cable, and it is when you hear these numbers, it's phenomenal given the way the comics sell now. It is currently selling 200,000 copies a month,
Wow.
and it's losing 10,000. I'm sorry, I'm telling the story wrong. Uh, we are publishing a comic uh, called Cable, which is currently selling 250,000 copies a month, and it's losing 10,000 readers a month. This is no disrespect to anybody working on the book. I just, at the time, there were 15 X-Men comics, and this particular one was not maintaining its audience. Um, if it drops below 200,000, we're going to cancel the book. Which, if you had a book that sold 200,000 copies now,
Yeah,
you would be the
that's
#1 comic by far.
Like, even the best-selling comics now aren't selling 200,000.
Yes, no, that's what I mean. It's like if you had a Batman comic that was selling 200,000, you'd be crushing everybody in the business. So I thought, okay, so you're basically saying to me, I have 6 months to save the life of this book. She said, yeah. So I said, okay, I'm happy to get on the Titanic and see whether or not we can turn it into the Queen Mary. That sounds like fun. So it sort of means I can do anything because who cares? And then what's always important to me in any book, which is, I said, well, who's going to draw it? Because one of the things that's somewhat different with me than a lot of writers that are out there, and I only know this because I've done enough of these interviews that people have asked me, who do you write for? And a greater majority of writers say, at least this is my experience, say that they write for themselves and that they see themselves very much as an architect who has drawn up a set of blueprints. And then the artist's job is to build the building. It's not the artist's job, if we're going to beat this bad metaphor to death, to say to the architect, it might be better if the window was on the side of the house, not here in front of the house. Because the architect would then go, just build the house, okay? It's not really your business. And also, particularly then and before that, I mean, I'm talking 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Most books were done by the writer wrote a script that was approved by the editor, sent it to the editor. The editor then sent it to an artist, any artist. It didn't matter who it was. It was whoever the artist that was available on that particular, or the one who was doing that book. And all communication was done through the editor. And I ran into this big time when I was at DC. I actually had an editor say to me, we actually find that when a writer and an artist speak to each other, there's a lot of miscommunication with what happens here in editorial. And so we would like everything to go through us, which to me was basically a way of saying, you tell me, and then I'll decide whether or not I'm going to tell the artist, which was never. So I because I didn't know anything about the business and because this was a new thing for me, I approached it very much. By the way, a lot of writers also write for fans, which I think is great as well. I'm not disparaging any other way of doing this, but I have always found that, and I think it is because of my screenwriting background, that I don't. I write for a specific actor, or I write for a specific director. I try to understand what they do best and write towards their strengths. So when
Which is what a good writer and director does.
Your words, not mine. And so, but because it was originally it was just me and Tim Sale, it was just Tim and I just talked on the phone every day. So it was just, well, what about this? What do we? How about should this be close up? To how much do you want to see? This is a big, huge spread. Let's make sure that we do this kind of stuff. Like that's where I came from. So she had said that there was a Canadian artist by the name of Steve Skroce who had been on the book, and I really liked Steve's style. I thought it was cool. One of the great things about the X-Men in those days, and I'm not saying that it's not true now, but it really was a breeding ground for just incredible young artists. I mean, when you look at the people that were working, I'm talking post Jim Lee. But even just beginning with Jim, it really was a launch for nearly every great big name. Like, they just came along, and those will play into what we're talking. I mean, the Kubert brothers, Joe Madureira, like it was just a festival.
Ian Churchill, so great.
So I'm on this book. I'm with Steve Skroce, and our first issue comes out, and actually the first issue was not drawn by Steve. It was drawn by, because he was doing my first issue was 17, and I think I got that right. 16 was a double with Wolverine, and so Steve wasn't available, and so they found an artist by the name of Mike Brewer. I think that's his name, who I've never seen again. I think he drew that issue, had enough of me, and that was the end of that conversation. But Mike, if you're out there, thank you. You launched me in the X-Men office.
Thank you, Mike.
And so, and there, I told that story, and then I started doing my own books with Skroce, and little by little, the numbers turned around. I'm not sure how or why or any of those things. If I knew that, then all I would do is write success all the time, and I can't say that I've done that. And so I was then allowed into the inner circle, and the inner circle was at that time Bob Harris, Scott Lobdell, and Fabian Nicieza, and Fabian and Scott did the two top books. They did X-Men and Uncanny X-Men. And so I got a call from Scott who said, "Listen, if you want, I'll take you through this massive crossover that we're about to do." And he explained to me what Age of Apocalypse was, and more than anything, the thing that I thought was cool was that everyone has to remember, there was no internet, there was no previews, there was nothing out there that you could look 4 months into the future and go, well, Rogue isn't really dead because here she has her own miniseries come out in March. So, blah, spoiler alert. So they said they were going to cancel all the X-Men books. And people went insane. Like it was literally like your favorite television shows all of a sudden were canceled. Not just to hide, they were 8 out of the top 10 books.
In the stratosphere.
That was all that was there.
Yeah.
Like you basically were decimating the business. with
Yeah.
no explanation as to what was going to happen. Nothing. It wasn't like they said, oh, and then after that, there's going to be this cool thing. They just said, we're canceling all these books. And so I was like, okay, well, that sounds interesting. Uh, and so I think it was Scott. I don't even think Bob knew. I got invited to the X-Men Summit, which was every year or twice a year. The writers would get together. In this particular case, it was the writers and the artists. It was unusual for the artists because it was a lot of talking about story, and artists like they need to get pages done. Writers can like and okay, and then an artist has to work for a month to get 20, 22, 24 pages done.
Yeah.
So we were there, and I just remember Scott standing in front of, and they used to do this a lot at the summits. They were these big sheets of paper, like artist paper. Like if you ever went to like a kid's finger painting class, it was like those things that you'd roll over, and then the next one you'd write on that, and then you'd roll over that. This was not in the age of the whiteboard or any of those things. This was like, okay, tear down that page and then do something else. So Scott got up and explained how all of the books were then going to either disappear or change into something else. And of course, I'm sitting there going, okay, so there's like my book's gone. Like they just basically just said, well, there is no cable. And I was like, could we talk about B, which is whatever everything was about in those days. And then I mean we had spent days of talking about what this was going to feel like, and the idea was that it was going to be an alpha, which again no one had ever done, which was we're going to set up the story in its own like annual, and then there was going to be 4 months of these new books, and then this last book, this Omega, where everything got resolved. And there are going to be new costumes and new names and new characters. And I was like, this is insanity. Like this, you're talking about creating an entire X-Men universe like a week from tomorrow. Like this was not like, and we're doing this in a year from now. Like we were doing this in a monthly basis. I was on like cable 17. And this was going to be happening in cable 20. Like, I was like, okay, so we have 4 months to figure out the next 5 months of whatever this is going to be. And by the way, how's it going to end? Like,
yeah.
And what happens when we go back? And I kept asking all the questions that everyone was like, yeah, you're the new kid. Shut up. But I was like, it was like when I was on Lost. All I wanted to know was, how's this going to end? And I learned on Lost that you can't set out to do that kind of gigantic storytelling without knowing where you're going. Now, and I know there were a lot of rumors about how, well, they were making it up as they were going on. It's not what happened. What did happen is, and this is, people ask me all the time, when you were doing Long Halloween or you were doing Hush, like that's a year-long story. Did you know where you were going? And I'm thinking to myself, yes, guys, like the only way to do this is you have to think about it like you're planning a road trip. And the road trip is to get from New York to California. And you have to do it in this amount of time, whether it's 4 months or 6 months or whatever it's going to be. And all you know is that you're going to go to Philadelphia, Chicago, Nashville, Dallas, Mount Rushmore, the Grand Canyon, and Los Angeles. That you know. what you don't know and what you learn in writing is that, oh, it's interesting. Like when you're in Nashville, you met a girl and she sort of changed your plans. And so you decided to stay an extra week. That doesn't mean you're not going to Mount Rushmore or you're not going to the Grand Canyon. You just have to now change things to make things happen. So, but this was a relatively short amount of time. Like these were 4 issues. If you can't figure out a story in 4 issues, like you shouldn't be telling a story, like, or you shouldn't be telling that story. And so, I think they were kind of looking for a way to reimagine cable. And I suspect, I'm not, my favorite new quote is, a conspiracy theory is not a theory. It is by very definition not a theory. And so, but I really strongly suspect that because Rob Liefeld, who had left and gone and formed Image and was kicking their ass around the block with his own comics, that they were trying anything to sort of reinvent any of his characters so that he couldn't lay claim to them later in life.
Gotcha.
Which, if you follow Rob, he's having the time of his life. Like Deadpool and Cable are out there in every format.
And he's spoken about that on his own pod. He was well aware of that reimagining. He did a Cable episode. He's done deep dives and all that.
And so I said, look, I think the only thing that is holding this character back is that Rob wisely gave him the technovirus. And so that meant that this incredibly powerful telepath could not change the world, alter reality, do any of those things. And I thought, well, suppose this was a kid or a teenager who hadn't been exposed to that. Like, that much power housed in an 18-year-old, that's an interesting story. And then it sort of just, it was a duh to say, and we'll call it X-Man. Like, it was like,
he's the X-Man.
Okay, let's do that. There was no book called X-Man, so let's do that. And again, thinking like Marvel, they were like, we can trademark that. It wasn't whether it was a good idea or a bad idea. It was just, we can trademark that. And so we were kind of like, then we divvied up what characters we could have, and I don't know how I wound up with like Forge and and Sinister, and it was
Siren as well.
Like we were playing like chess, and you got a rook and a bishop and a pawn, and that's what you got. And so, but I was just sort of fascinated by Scott, and it was Scott who pitched that Cyclops was a total badass, and that he only had one eye. He was a true Cyclops. And I don't think they may have, but to my memory, the idea was they were never going to tell the story of why Wolverine had one hand and why Cyclops only had one eye. If you were playing the home game, you could tell what had happened there. Now, the story actually ever told?
Yeah, it was. And Scott, we've had Scott on the podcast a couple of times, and he's talked about that. I believe with Wolverine, the design choice was just because he looked cool with one hand. But in story, it's explained that they got into a fight. They were trying to save Jean from the pens,
but that was discussed. You didn't see that scene, did you?
I think it was hinted at in Weapon X. I should know this because I just researched it. It was either 3 or 4 that was sort of mentioned that something had gone down.
Right, but there weren't.
No, we did not see. There was not an actual. No. Yeah, okay. No, we.
So there was. So there were things
a Fleer
like
Ultra
that.
card, but just nothing else.
Gotcha. So there were. There's a Fleer Ultra card. So
sorry, we're nerds here.
uh, uh, Fun fact: the guy who was the president of Fleer at the time that we were doing all this nonsense was Dan Buckley. Dan Buckley, who's now the president of Marvel
Yeah.
Worldwide.
Yeah.
So you just never know who you're going to piss off when you're young. And so, no, Dan and I are good friends. So, but when I first met Scott, and again, this is the arrogance of my youth, is that I said to him, I I'm really glad to meet you. I just want to let you know this is my B job.
You're like, I
Why?
kept my day job.
What, like whatever possessed me to say this to the guy who's like running the summit. And for years, Scott would just go, listen, if you could take a little time away from your A job and talk to those of us that are in your B job. Well, I have to tell you, he and I any success I had in the X-Men office is because of Scott Lobdell. Like Scott navigated, Bob was going to call me and eviscerate me for something, and Scott would get him to laugh and forget about it. And then on the other hand, Scott would call me up and go, "What do you think of this idea?" And then we would trade ideas. And then, I mean, all my stories were better because of Scott. Like he knew those characters, knew where he wanted them to go. Um, and sometimes he just pitched me when we were first dealing with Onslaught, and I, the way that Scott pitched it, he was like, they're all sitting around, they're either at the pool or they're playing baseball. It's one of those scenes. And then all of a sudden, like this thing comes flying out of the sky like a meteor, and it lands, and they all run over, and it's Juggernaut. And all he says is Onslaught.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm in.
Perfect.
I have no idea
Yeah.
where you're going. I have no idea what Onslaught is. Do that. And that Scott could do that stuff like this, like this, like this. Like he just didn't. So when he explained Age of Apocalypse, all of my like, well, how's it going to end, and where we're going to go, and who's going to die, who's going to live, like all that stuff wasn't important to him, and he really taught me that at least at the beginning, you have to sell the cool, not the story.
Yeah.
Don't get hung up on. Well, I don't understand. How did she get to the top of the building? Nobody wants to see her come into the building, get on an elevator. Just start the scene on top of the building. It's fine. You'll be okay. And that's very true in television. Like, because you don't have the day in order to shoot all that stuff. You better just be on the roof.
Yeah.
And that was more than anything Scott's gift, and we became really close friends. And he was my human shield. I never would have survived in that office with my personality and Bob's personality. There was no way. And so the biggest gift of all, I have no idea if I've answered your question, but really the biggest gift of all was I got a phone call that said, we made a mistake. I think it was from Bob. And he said, because Bob could, for all my problems, Bob could also be a charming guy as well when he wanted something. And I'm not beyond being flattered into doing something stupid. And so he said, we don't have an end. We forgot to put in a story where all the X-Men get together just before the end of the world. So we don't have a button at the end of our Earth turns into the Age of Apocalypse Earth. And he said, and as it turns out, it could be Cable 20. And I was like, so you want me to write the last X-Men story is basically what you want me to do. Yeah.
Wow. No pressure.
And I said, okay. And I said, but Steve's already started on X-Man. Like, how are we going to get him back to do this? And they said, no, we found a young guy named Ian Churchill.
Yep.
And we think he can do it. And so I was like, okay, well, let me talk to Ian. And Ian's over in England, and we just hit it off. Like, it was just incredibly fun. And he was super into Cable and a huge fan of Rob's. So he really liked big Cable. Like Steve didn't draw Cable that big. And Ian really liked drawing him big with big guns and all that.
That's
Crap.
Cable. That's what people think about Cable.
And so I wrote An Hour of Last Things, which to this day, I know that story changed my life.
It changed a lot of our lives as fans. By the way, it's just so beautiful that last moment before the Emcron crystal comes. I mean, there's so many iconic moments in there.
The only
especially with Jean and Cyclops and Cable. That moment is something that's replayed for all the characters. It's had ramifications for decades.
Thank you. The only thing I didn't get to do, and again, this now takes me back to, do you know what it's like to work in the X-Men office? Was that I felt that Angel was not going to go quietly into the night. And so knowing that the end of the world was going to come, he said goodbye and he flew into the sun. Because I loved the Icarus of it. I loved the kind of idea that the Angel of the team is going to flee before. So in other words, like, you let hope out of the box. Like, that's what happens. And Bob just killed it. Like, he was just like, no, an X-Men does not commit suicide. And I was like, he's not committing suicide. He knows
it's
the
end of the world.
Die. Yeah. He's taking his way out. That's all.
And also Dark Phoenix. So also Dark Phoenix, the end of Dark Phoenix. Sorry to raise my hand.
Yeah. So that was the only thing that I remember about that issue that didn't happen. There were a lot of other times there were things that didn't happen. And then we were off to the races. And, we started writing, and X-Men came out, and the first issue sold 800,000 copies.
Wow!
And they were just like, okay, what are we gonna do? Like, and I was like, we're not doing anything. I'm telling my 4 stories, and then the world's gonna flip back over again, and everything's gonna be fine. And so they, at the time, there was just, a lot of talk about it was such a monstrous success.
Yes, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that again for our listeners? That X-Men, Nate Gray, issue 1, sold 800,000 copies and was a monstrous success.
Yes, it was. And by the way, that's with one cover.
Yes.
There was no foil cover. We didn't have multiple variants. There was nothing. We just sold it. Now, in fairness, I can't tell you. I mean, I know that Astonishing and Amazing sold like over 1 million. And I know that some of the other books, probably Weapon X, sold out really well. But there were a few that didn't quite have the same sparkle. I can't. I think people just thought X-Man was a cool title. Like, they didn't know what it was.
Well, and that cover is incredible. He just looks cool, and he was like a unique character that we hadn't seen in the standard X-Men comics. So he was. I was 9 years old at that point, and I can tell you that I was into that because that cover was just so explosive. He was so mysterious, and it just sucked me right in.
And that was Steve, and his ability to do that. So, am I jumping too far? That sort of brings us to how this came to be. Do you want me to keep going in this madness?
Go into excruciating detail on Nate, how he got his Rider Strong hair, the costume, his origin. We want to know all of it.
Well, all of the origin stuff and the relationship with Sinister and all that stuff, that was, me. The look of it, that's all Scrooge. He was the one who designed his hair to look that way. And it just looked cool.
Very 90s.
Yes.
Exactly. Everybody wore a jacket that was cropped for no reason at all.
I still wear crop jackets because of Nate.
So now this is where it becomes sort of the beginning of the end of me, which was weird because it wasn't going to happen for a while. But the, two things happened during Age of Apocalypse. One amazingly good, and one that would ultimately lead to my leaving. So the first was that on the amazingly good side, what happened in Hour of Last Things, the cable story, Cable 20, was that out of the blue, Bob called to tell me that he really liked the issue. Bob never called to do anything other than to say, "You're late." So getting a compliment from His Majesty was a big deal. and and he said at the time that it really felt like it was a book that was written by Scott, and that he started to call us, mostly to piss off Scott, Lobdell, instead of Lobdell. And so that was sort of the beginning of whenever Scott was late, which would happen because Scott was writing 6 books or something.
Yeah, something crazy.
I was writing 1. He would call and he would say, "Listen, can you dialogue this book?" And Bob would call, and I would immediately call Scott and I go, "Are you going to do this? Because I'm not taking work away from you." And he would go, "No, it'll be fun." So that's why I'm credited in Astonishing, because there's a couple of times, and that's how I got to meet Joe Mad. Joe Mad had been at the summit and stuff, but we first started working together during Astonishing, which was really where Joe took off. Like after that, Joe was a monster.
Of course.
Monster talent. So that was the really good thing. So I periodically, because Scott was on books that were selling like millions of copies, and I periodically got to jump in and help out, and so when you dialogue a book, you get a piece of the royalties. And in those days, you could buy a car with your royalties. It was amazing how much money there was. And there was a point at which I was making more money in comics than I was making in television, which is a phenomenal thing to say, because now you can't get a tire for what you worked in comics for. So the only people that work in comics are working there because they love it.
Yeah.
And which is probably making better comics. But at the time, particularly in the X-Men office, if you could get an X-Men comic, that was really all you needed. Well, now we get to the bad part, which did have some goodness to it, which was we were getting to the end of Age, or AOA, it was called, and I said, I called Bob, which you're not allowed to do.
Oh, interesting.
You're not allowed to call the king. You have to
Don't call me. I'll call you.
I'll call. No, it was more like you have to speak to someone who. I was supposed to go through Lisa, and then Lisa would take it to Bob, and then Bob, and I was like,
channels. There's
me,
channels.
I'm going to call him. So I called him and I said, "Listen, what we have here is pretty incredible. And I'm not saying that we should stay here. I completely agree with the plan, which is that we're going to flip back. But when we flip back, nothing stays. No one remembers. So I have to tell you that in television, a dream episode is the worst episode ever. It's just a waste of the audience's time. Oh, I got to see an alternate version of what these characters were, but nothing stuck. And Bob sort of, I'm sure, finishing his tennis game while he's talking to me. He just could not care less. And he goes,
the tea.
And he goes, so what are you suggesting? And I said, look, think of a Rubik's Cube. And during the Age of Apocalypse, our Rubik's Cube got all janky. So they were all different colors. That's why there were different costumes and all kinds of things. I said, all I want to do is when it comes back around, that on the red side, one of those squares is yellow. And there's a long pause, and Bob goes, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. You need me to go, I don't know what the hell I'm talking
about. No, curse as much as you want, because that means our fucking king, Nate Gray, would be that yellow square.
And so, well, but that wasn't my pitch. My pitch was, and he goes, I don't understand what you're saying. I'm saying that we should do something that is different. Like, like, let's like swap Wolverines or something. Like, just something that like, and he was like, well, let me talk to Scott and I'll get back to you. So he talks to Scott, he comes back, and he goes, we've solved your problem. We're going to do Dark Beast and Sugar Man. and I was like, this is a joke, right? And he goes, no. And I said, I pitched Wolverine. Like, and you came back to me with Sugar Man? Like that fat guy with a long tongue that doesn't do anything, which, by the way, I wound up using. And Dark Beast. He goes, yeah, like people would be completely weirded out by the fact. I said, I'm not really looking for a dark version of our characters. I think the idea is to show what it would be like to have lived like through like the Holocaust, and now you're in here. Like, here's great. And so, like, and maybe a level of violence we weren't expecting. Like, what could we? And out of this conversation, he goes, well, what if we continued X-Men? Would that solve your problem? Thinking that that's what I was in it for. And by the way, I had already started Cable 21. And so there was like, I started writing it, and I was like, well, how's this going to work? Like, so you're saying there's a Cable book and there's an X-Men book, X-Man book? And he was like, yeah, that could be cool. X-Men sells really well. It sells better than Cable. So, why don't we have it stick around? And I said, okay, but how's it going to work? And I said, let me talk to Lisa and I'll get back to you. So I called Lisa and I said, look, I don't want to make it sound like I'm cheating on my wife, but I thought that what Gross was doing on X-Men was super cool. And I thought what Ian was doing on Cable was super cool. Like,
yeah,
we get those guys, because putting Gross back on Cable and then not knowing who's going to draw X-Men doesn't interest me at all. And, and then, of course, it was Bob's idea. And so, once it became Bob's idea, it was fine. And so I set off writing Cable, and then I turned in my first issue of X-Men, and with a pitch. And to this day, this was the beginning of the end. So Bob threw out the script. And this is all I remember about the script, was that I thought it was important that the story began in Seattle, because X-Men Alpha began in Seattle. And so it was important that the only character who had lived through the Age of Apocalypse was standing in Seattle going, something's different.
Yeah.
Like, there was a culling here. There were literally millions of bodies lying around in the street. and it was now this beautiful city. Like I wanted to do, and appropriately, it was called Stranger in a Strange Land, that which was what the title of the story was. I think that was the only thing that survived. So Bob tells me that the story takes place in Switzerland, which I go, what? Like, do you have property in Switzerland? Are you planning on going on vacation in Switzerland?
Yeah,
You
like
want to write it
why?
off?
This doesn't make any
Why?
sense.
Yeah.
He goes, it takes place in Switzerland, and Madelyne Pryor is the second lead of the book. And I went, Madelyne Pryor, Gene's clone? And he goes, yeah. And I go, who cares? Like, no. Like the story is the first thing he would do is seek out Forge.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
that was
his Siren.
That was his mentor, and then go put the band back together again.
Yeah.
And explain what had happened. But that was not that. None of that was to be approved. And I didn't understand Madelyne Pryor. I was just like, guys, there's no there. Like you're asking me to, you might as well have just said he's friends with the Blob. They have more in common than Madelyne Pryor. No, you don't understand because she's really Cable's mother. And I was like, yeah, it depends on who you talk to, and it's a clone, and it's just a mess. Like, why do we want to step in a mess? Like, we have an opportunity to start a new character. But this was my pitch, which was there was a MTV show called Dead at 21. And I said, that's what we should do. I said, I want to tell a story that starts the first 5 issues, from 5 to 10, are Stranger in a Strange Land. Then the next 5 issues are Nate realizing that he is the most powerful mutant on the planet and that he can do anything that he wants to. I said, you got to remember, he's 18 years old. So he's going to make some bad judgments. So for 5 issues, he's going to be he's basically going to kick Magneto's ass and go, you don't really consider yourself a villain. I will show you what it is to be a villain. And then the last 5 issues was his relationship with Scott and how Scott, as his father, was going to teach him how to become a hero. And then what you realize as this is going along is that Sinister, who had made him, never intended for his, and we kind of hinted at this, but never intended that for his body to be able to contain that much power. And so in issue 21, and I remember the conversation with Bob, where I said, and then in issue 21, he dies. And that's it. We're canceling the book. I don't care.
21 right there.
I said, I don't care if it's selling 40 million copies.
Yeah.
Like, goodbye. Like, it is a 21-part story that ends with his death. But it is a true X-Men story because it is about, this is my upbringing, this is my teaching and learning, this is my turn as a villain, this is my discovery as a hero, and this is my heroic death. I said, we've never done it. We have an opportunity. There's no reason for this book to continue after 21 issues. We have Cable. It's the same character at the end of the day. So I'll do anything you want with Cable, but we got to get rid of this book. It was so deafening. And it was clear to me at that point that Bob saw me as the enemy. Like, I did not understand that when His Majesty says it's Madelyne Pryor and Switzerland, that and when you look at 5, 6, 7, and I think part of 8, I'm not sure it lasted that long. Uh, they're just I just literally had no idea where I was going, what I was doing, what Nate
No.
was doing, and then poor John Ostrander got handed this pile of crap, and nobody really had a take. Years later, I guess Warren did when he sort of made him a god, which I never. At that point, I'd left. Um, but I got fired. Like he called me up and he said, you don't understand this book. I'm taking you off the book." And
Damn.
I was like, "Okay,
You're
but
like, I don't understand. Explain
I,
Switzerland to me, because that doesn't make any
Yeah,
sense. Explain
because
Switzerland, buddy.
I was like, look, I think I do understand the character. I created the character with Gross. Like, uh, I appreciate that this is your kingdom, and that was sort of like the end of the conversation. Like, well, then you understand that you're off the book. Now, the weirdest part was while he was doing that, he also offered me X Force. So it was this weird kind of like, I'm going to take you off this book, but I'm going to put you on like the number 3 book in the X Men office. And I was like, huh?
well, he
Like,
liked what you were doing. He just didn't want a big seller to end at 21 issues.
uh, one can again. However, Bob tells this story, just know that it's a lie. That's all I can tell you. Uh, and and then it went from bad to worse. It just, I mean, I had so much fun with everybody that worked in the office, except periodically someone would call me and go, so Bob was in the office and he said this about you, and they said this about you, and I remember on Yom Kippur, which is a very holy holiday where you're not supposed to do anything. And I called him, and he goes, Jeph, isn't it like a holiday for you? Like, isn't this? And I said, yes. So this is why I'm going to try to tell you this, and how important it is. Do not ever, in the words of Will Smith, have my name come out of your mouth. Like, we're done, Bob. Like, and that was it. That was the end of my journey in the X-Men.
Yeah.
I got to finish up the books, and that was it. And I'm I had the most fun when X-Man and Cable were in that crossover. And just because I got to see Ian draw him, and that was super cool. And
We've had Ian on the podcast as well, and he has sung your praises. He had so much fun doing those issues with you and Cable 20. I forgot what he said, but the general vibe was he couldn't believe that he was doing that.
well, it's so funny because literally about just a few months ago, I was at a con, and then I was at a dinner, and one of the guys at the con was a collector, like a serious collector. And he said, I have something I want to show you, and I want to know whether or not you'll sign it. And he has the double page spread at the end with all of the X-Men. It's actually one of those days where you could turn the page, so
Yeah.
in order to read it. So it's this horizontal spread that Ian drew. And there's not a lot of times where I've looked at something and went, "Can I have this? Like, boy, would you ever sell this?" And the guy was like looking at me like, "You're asking
Like,
me
no,
like
Jeph
for my
Loeb.
kid.
No.
Just sign it, okay?" And then I'm putting it back in the box before it's
If it goes
uh,
missing, he knows where it is.
Yeah,
exactly.
well, that shot is epic. It's an epic shot. I get it.
Beautiful.
And it's gorgeous.
Uh, uh, and Cable Kissing Domino. That page I have. And so there's, you know, I had I had a lot of very great fond memories. But it's just funny because I worked as long at DC, and there wasn't a single human being over there that I could say anything disparaging about. It was just always fun. And I worked in the Spider-Man office, and anybody that that anytime that it involved Joe Quesada, greatest time in the world.
He's a good guy.
And his wife Nancy, who was our editor on all the color books, best editor I've ever worked with. Just incredibly encouraging, great ideas, just remarkable. And we used to just laugh, the three of us, about because Joe's the Marvel Knights book was on a different floor. I know that I'm going like this, and you're going, "What's he doing?"
No, I used to intern at Marvel, so I get it. Like they had I think it was 23, 24, 20. Like I remember that.
And so they were, we would just sit upstairs whenever I came to New York and just talk about just how insane Bob was. But at that time, like Bob was then the editor in chief. Like he had moved all the way up and had become the boss of bosses. He wasn't the success of the X-Men grew into him being in charge. But Joe at Marvel Knights had in his contract that he didn't answer to anybody except Dan. Yeah. And so we now were the little pirates that were running around firing on England and hoping that we could hit the king. And then karma's a bitch because last I heard, with no disrespect to anybody who's ever had this job, Bob was in charge of reprints at DC, that's a pretty long fall.
Not quite comparable.
No.
But I think the word had gotten out at that point that, and then I should point out that what also started it was that I would see the final copy and my dialogue had been changed. Or more importantly, and this drove me insane, particularly on X-Force, I would set up a joke and then the punchline was cut. So the joke would be like,
it's weird.
It doesn't make sense. It would literally be like, what are you doing in Cincinnati? And then the punchline would be like, I'm throwing the ball out at Riverfront Stadium. And there, like one of those two would be missing. And you'd be like, I don't understand. Just cut the whole thing if you don't want. And then I remember at this point, Mark Powers was the editor, and Mark would say, no, that's what it happened. Like I literally would have to Xerox stuff and send it to him and go, look, I know you're trying to protect Bob, and I know Bob is changing the dialogue, and so just like ask him how to do that, please. And I'm sure I didn't say that nearly as nicely.
There's probably no please involved.
I don't even think there was. There may have been some F-bombs in there, and I 30 years later, I can now look back and go, it's comics. You can't, it's one of the things that I learned as when I was running Marvel Television, and I used to have to talk to the showrunners. I would say to them, listen, a good producer has to understand that the casting, a line of dialogue, a salt and pepper shaker that's in the scene, and when the scene ends, cannot all have the same weight. You can't have a fight over every single thing, or you will burn out. Because eventually the people that you're talking to are going to say, well, what's important? I like everything can't be important. And I've had people look me straight in the face and go, no, you're wrong. Everything is important. And you have to be that guy. And I was that guy. And I now realize that I've come to appreciate, or at least I hope so, and I certainly hope the people that I worked with later on in life, and a lot of the people I had to go back and apologize to, that, you know what, it's 22 pages. If 21 of them are great, have great art, great color, great inking, great penciling, great lettering, design, and there's a screw up on the dialogue on one of those pages, you're the only one who knows that. Like the people
Yeah.
that are home reading the book, they're not sitting there going, "I'm never going to read this book again because that joke didn't play." Um, uh, but again, it's the arrogance of youth, and and even though I was not as young as I was acting, but it was a new business, and again, I think I always wore on my sleeve this idea that it was my B job, and that was incredibly disrespectful to those people, except Bob, and uh, uh, and
That's going
I,
to be the name of this episode, except Bob.
uh, and so you know, now in fairness, in credit where credit's due, there is no Age of Apocalypse without Bob. There
Yeah.
is no Jim Lee without Bob. There is no Rob Liefeld without Bob. There is no Joe Madureira without Bob. Um, you know, he got handed a giant turd when Chris and John Byrne broke up. Like that book was like the Bible. Like
Yeah.
this was it. This was like the peak of X-Men, whatever. And he got handed that, and he spent day and night building that franchise. And I got to work there because he deemed it okay. So I understand all of that. It's just, there were things that I obviously still carry today for no reason. Because, again, Bob's not in my life. It has nothing to do with me. And I really like the guys that are there now. So it's, and CB is, you know, he's just magic. He is what
He's
you
a good
want.
guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the same kind of way that Joe was too. I mean, you're talking about the princes at Marvel. So
Well, I think with Bob, if he hires you to do a job, there should be some trust that you know what you're doing and that you can
sure,
that you
it's
can do your job.
a spit take. Uh, yeah, great. That's nice. Uh, obviously, you're not married. Uh, it's it the world. I would like the world to work like that, and I do my best at everything that I do. I really try to hire people for what they were hired to do and encourage them to do their best work. I think that's how you get the best work out of people.
And by the way, your work has speaks for itself because your time on cable, X Force, X-Men is my favorite. Nate Gray is my number one favorite. We have built a podcast and a community based off of one image of Nate Gray. But even the Netflix shows. I'm a New Yorker, and I have to tell you, I had friends who were they were eager for Daredevil. I was going to say Deadpool, Daredevil, Jessica Jones. Like you created such a vibe, and that work
Yeah.
radiates with a lot of people.
I'm incredibly grateful for those people, but I will always say that everybody that was involved on those shows just understood the vision and executed it brilliantly. And they were just great teams. And it is that old expression, which is there is no I in team. And then I always add, but there is in dick. And so it's that kind of thing that you have to be aware of, and I try, and I'm sure that there's people that are in the business that are listening to this going, "You're the biggest dick of all, Loeb. What are you talking about?" And I accept I accept my time when I did that, and I hope that I've learned from it. And there was also a 12-year period where I didn't write any comics, so I very much was out of the business, and got to see and enjoy and talk to my friends who still are in the business, and and that's great fun. And now, is my unabashed plug for, and I'm coming back with The Last Halloween, which will be out in 2 weeks. And
Yes. We can't wait.
it is beyond awesome, at least from an artistic point of view. That much I know. You guys will tell me whether or not the story is there, but it is quite a tribute to himself and the man he was.
I have to tell you, your X Force is a lot of people, including my favorite version of the team. It was, Rob came in, he did his thing, he established, this militant team, but then you sort of came in and you shook it up. You sort of decided to jettison the leaders a little bit. Like Cable was still around, but he wasn't, Cannonball was gone. Cable was doing his own thing in his book, and you started to sort of focus on the B cast a little bit more. What was your reasoning for sort of doing that?
It's funny, because my memory was that Cable was much more involved, but it's probably that it was just fun. I again, this goes now back to the gift that was Scott Lobdell, was that I said, look, this is ridiculous. They're either the New Mutants, X Force, or they are the training ground to be an X-Men. So somebody has to graduate, or
Yeah.
this is false. And so he said, well, who are you thinking about? And I said, well, you can pick whoever you want because it's your book. But I think Sam Cannonball is ready to go.
Yeah.
And I think it's sort of a nice heartbreak thing because he's both young and the oldest in the group. So oldest mature wise. Um, and I think that'll open up the possibility for greater conflict because he's not there to tell Roberto to, calm down and the fact that I remember any of these characters is beyond me. Sunspot. And I really liked bringing in Caliban. It just made Caliban made me laugh because he was sort of like their Hulk, and so I was like, because now he no longer was the skinny little guy. He was now
Yeah.
he was this great huge monster, and I loved the way that Ian drew him. Ian's first story was with Caliban,
Yeah.
and so in the annual. But no, the real find uh, was that again, these are stories that probably never should be told, but I I was looking through the book, um, and I have to say that present day Tony Daniel is a remarkable artist. Uh, but at the time, uh, he had kind of a way of shooting every scene from the backside of a woman. Like she'd be in the foreground, and then there would be all this action in the background. And so I I called him and I said, I just want to let you know that if you do that ever again, I'm going to take the page out of the book. And I don't think anybody had ever spoken to him like that. I don't think anybody had ever spoken to me like that. So, but again, that just speaks to the person that I was then. And the next day he quit. Uh,
Oops.
and that was a big whoops because he was like the star of the book. Him and Fabian were like they were driving the train. Fabian had been on the book from the beginning, and so now Fabian was gone. Now Tony was gone. I was like, okay, and that may not have been why Tony left. I never asked, but suddenly Bob called and said, "Well, you don't have an artist, and this book ships in X time." And I was like, okay, uh, are you willing to take a chance on a new guy? And I had found Adam Polina.
Oh,
He had done a book on uh, uh, for a company called Triumph, and called Chromium Man, and I just thought it was cool. And
yeah.
I literally, had no idea how to find him. And so I called, I found somebody at Triumph and they had his home phone. And then I called his house. I don't know if you've ever had Adam on. He's such a great storyteller.
We'd love
And,
to.
uh, I just remember his mom answering the phone. And I just pictured this like, Martin Scorsese family in Brooklyn. And I could hear his mom go, Adam, there's someone on the phone for you. Who, Ma? I don't know. What's your name? It says his name is Jeph Loeb. Oh, hang on. And then I'd hear, oh, and then they'd be like whispering. He goes, sure, it's Jeph Loeb. And she goes, I don't know who Jeph Loeb is. Whatever. And so he gets on the phone. He goes, hello. And I go, is this Adam Polina? And he goes, yeah, this is Jeph Loeb. And I just, I just wanted to know that, I really dig Chromium Man. And he was like, wow, like we sold like 10 copies. Like, where'd you get one? And I was like, I don't know. I go to the store all the time. I'm looking for new talent. And do you want to do this book, Loose Cannon, over at DC? And he was like, yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll have fun. And while we were doing it, and by the way, that book was a complete failure. But while we were doing it, um, I I just thought he was getting better and better and faster and faster. And so I said to Bob, will you take a chance on Anapolina? And it was literally one of those like, yeah, for an issue, like, we'll see how he does. And so I don't think I ever told Adam that. Like, I just said, Adam, you got the book. And the next thing we knew, Adam had the book, and he just took off and just drew the hell out of it. And
Oh yeah.
we just had so much fun. And then he stayed. Like, I thought for sure that when I left, he was going to go, well, I'm going to go off with Jeph. No, he stayed.
He was having
Uh,
too much fun.
and
Rise
yeah,
of
I just love it.
Apocalypse, Angel Revelations. He did
Yeah.
some pretty big stories
Yeah.
that were very
Uh,
well done and are beautifully rendered. I mean, Angel
uh,
Revelations is very stylized.
yeah. So, and I run into him from time to time. Um, uh, so yeah, that's the story of X-Force, I think. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you absolutely did. I just want to follow up with, did you have anything to do with them switching to the purple and gold
Yeah,
costumes, or is that?
absolutely. I thought I missed that about the unity of the team. Again, I
Yeah.
sort of saw it as, I understood what Rob was doing, which was he was creating singular characters so that they could live on.
Yeah.
And when you build them as a team, you don't have an opportunity to make them into a toy, to be perfectly frank. And I probably, if I had a chance to do it again, I probably would have found uh, different costumes. But I thought it was important visually that you understood that they were all the same.
Yeah, well, don't get me wrong. I love those costumes. And I just remember at the time nobody none of the other X-Men were in purple. So that was an incredibly bold choice that really made that book stand apart and those characters stand apart visually from everything else. And I think pretty much any X fan, around our age, who came up, we're probably about teenagers when that came out. It just the nostalgia of those costumes and that era of X-Force, it hits right in the chest. It's a
Awesome.
it's a fan favorite for sure.
Awesome.
And I love you said the thing about unity because when X-Force kicked off, they all had individual costumes to sort of emphasize that they were their own person, they weren't part of a group. And now you're coming in and you're flipping that vibe to show that they are a team. It's it was a good choice. We enjoyed it.
Well, again, the book had been around for 3 years, and I sort of felt like, okay, it's time to shake things up and see what happens. Um, but I stayed on. I think I was there for 2 years. I was on cable for three, or the other way around. So for me, that's an eternity. Like I'm usually 12 and out, guys. Thanks very much. I'll see you later. I'm not sticking around for the downfall. But again, I have to give credit where credit's due. Like my success in that office had to do with, uh, you know, really more than anything, five people. First and foremost, Scott Lobdell. Uh, Secondly, my three artists who were Adam and Steve Skrosny and Churchill. And then in his own way, Joe Madureira, you know, by having me on a few issues with him, you know, just gave me real credibility in that office. Because Joe was the number one guy. Uh, and then on top of which I got to be friends with Joe. So you know, and we still stay in touch. So it's you know, that kind of thing.
We love Joe. I mean, again, his artwork really for fans that were coming up on it in the 90s, that is just a real peak time to be an X-Men fan.
Absolutely.
Jeph, you have an incredible body of work, and we've solicited the Familia for some questions that they had for you. And I have to tell you, one of the things that came right to the top. I mean, listen, we got questions about heroes, we got questions about Tim Sale, Batman, but the one thing that so many people sent in questions about was Ultimatum. And what was sort of the editorial mandate to end the Ultimate Universe at that time? And what was your thought process going into it?
Well, it's interesting. Obviously, it's a hot button.
Yeah.
For a lot of people. I think I have to sort of. I think we have to uh, keep something in mind, which is you know go back, look at how well those books sold, all the way out to issue 6, and that was my job. Was to sell books. In particular, that was my job because I got approached by upper management who had said that it was really feeling like the Ultimate Universe, with the exception of Miles, that the Ultimate Universe, while a gigantically great experiment in its time, it was slowly, and in particular the X-Men book, was becoming the same as just another regular X-Men book. Like all of the things that Brian and Mark in particular, Mark Millar, and Brian Michael Bendis had created had sort of withered.
Yeah.
And again, I want to strongly state that at no time was Ultimate Spider-Man brought into this conversation. It was the other books that was in that group. And you know, I'd had a considerable amount of success and none of which I take credit for. And during one of the summits, Brian Michael Bendis had pitched what would eventually become No More Mutants. It was literally the opportunity for us to define Magneto as, I mean, it eventually turned into a Scarlet Witch story, but that it was this story. And I had pitched at the time the idea that Magneto had reversed the polarity of the poles, and that would essentially wipe out all of humanity. And it was really taken from, I can say it openly now, was that in an obscure book called Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu, Fu Manchu had this plan, which was that he was going to blow up the moon because if you did the math, that there were more Asians that lived in China than lived throughout the world. And so if all of humanity was wiped out, the one thing that was going to be left was the Asian population. And that was his plan. And I thought, that's an awesome plan. If what you're trying to do is restart the world. But I didn't want to take that that was somebody else's plan. That wasn't my plan. And so I thought, what if a father's grief was so great that what he wanted to do was destroy the world? And this was the place where I was certainly having the most fun. Was that what if villains could do anything they wanted to do, knowing that the world was going to end, and that's what it was going to be. The thing that bothers me the most about the criticism of it is really twofold. One, a lot of the criticism is just criticism that was fed by criticism. Meaning, I've had people come up to cons and go, so how do you feel about Ultimatum? It's the worst story that was ever told. And I would go, okay, but when you read it, and then they would go, well, I've never read it. I just read that it's like the worst story ever told. And I would go, well, let me give you a little bit of advice. If you're going to come up and talk about it and you really want to have a conversation, read it. And then come and tell me whether or not that's what you think. But take all of that aside. Dave Finch's artwork for 6 consecutive issues is some of the best artwork in comics. I'm not even talking about I'm talking about in superhero comics in terms of the dynamic of the characters and what is going on and the gigantic scope of it, on time, on the money, all over the place. Like, he nailed it. And that is unfortunate that got swept under. But I learned a really, really important lesson, and that is, no matter what story you're telling, when you decide to kill a character, you have to understand that's someone's favorite character. Yeah. So I didn't, when I was approached to take on this assignment, and there's not a lot of stories that I get approached for. I go to them and go, I have this cool idea. What do you think? And that's the way I want to do it. Or I want to take over this book and this is the direction I want to go in and this is what I have in mind. This was really just an assignment that was like, we need to clean up this universe and start over again. And by the way, if you want one of the books afterwards, you can. And
it's like a 2 for 1. Wipe it and then you'll get this new one.
And I personally, I don't think enough people give credit to Arthur Adams' work on Ultimate X. And I think Ultimate X has characters in it, including Jimmy, who's, I guess, survived and was running around somewhere.
Yeah, he came.
Just to clarify, we read Ultimatum as it was being published. Yes, it is fun in terms of the disaster, the Ultimate Universe is coming to end, but also those issues of Ultimate X with Jean dyeing her hair black and working at a mall. The art was beautiful and it was fun, and I think I was always perplexed by any reaction to the book, because at a certain point, though, this was, I believe did it come out in the summer? I'm trying to remember the pub dates for it, but I just remember being on the subway reading a fun comic book where the world is ending, Magneto motivated by grief, and it's so it shocks me that people will come up to you and say, well, I heard it was a bad, and didn't actually read it, because that's not, it wasn't bad. Like, and to give our listeners credit, no one was saying this was a crappy story or anything. They just wanted to know, because I think the Ultimate Universe recently has resurfaced, and a lot of people have been curious, why did it end so abruptly like that, which you just answered, and now it's back again.
It was. And again, when I saw that it was back again with Jonathan, I get it. I mean, to have alternate versions and to create stories where you're not hampered by 40 years of continuity, great. Um, I would, and please feel free to share this throughout the internet. The one thing that I want to make 100% clear, even though when I called Mark Millar and said to him, I need to know when you leave the book, where is everybody on Ultimates? And by the way, Ultimates 1 and 2 with Brian Hitch, some of the greatest stuff ever done. And I knew, look, I've got Joe Mad to come back and do 6 issues. Let's just have some fun and see what we're going to do. And I knew that in the same kind of way that I learned a really important lesson in that, it's always someone's favorite character that you just knocked off or changed or gave a haircut to or whatever it is, the most vocal people are going to come out and talk about. But I want to make something clear. Despite the fact that Mark Millar went through each character and then at the end of this long, like half-hour conversation, he goes, and then, and he's got a Scottish accent, which I can't do. He said, and Quicksilver and Wanda are, shagging all over the place. And I was like, oh, okay, I know you kind of implied that's what was happening, but okay, if that's what's happening, then okay, I'll see what I can do with that. So it was never, ever my intention that a brother and sister were having a relationship. That was not what's going to happen. And if you read Ultimate X, at the end of the comic, the door opens and in walks Chthon, who is the evil version of the Scarlet Witch.
Yeah.
Because the Scarlet Witch was dead. So who was the Scarlet Witch that was running around? Nobody asked that. No, all they wanted to do was just go, what is it that Wolverine saw when she looked through the bushes and came back and then made this incredible statement that they're more than just brother and sister, and people were just going out of their minds that I had put this in a comic book. But I was just saying, guys, just stick around, because all of this, Pietro was being manipulated, and the idea was to have Chthon and Quicksilver then become the new Magneto of the Ultimate Universe. Was that she was going to affect his mind in such a way that he would realize no one could touch me. No one can kill me because there's nothing that you like. There's no way to kill the fastest man alive. And so, and we would have really good, solid, new villains with new costumes and new everything. All that was going to happen. But, the sales, my time, I forget what it was. It was all just time to go. But I also have to say that Ultimates 4, which brought back Thor, Frank Cho's artwork. There are double page spreads in that to this day I've never seen anybody do. I mean, I would say to him, so the Enchantress comes along and she's riding on a dragon. And then you look at the double page spread and there's 100 ogres and giant trolls and all these. And I'm like, Frank, what are you drawing? There's a dragon, and he goes, well, she needs an army. And I was like, yeah, like in the background, like little like eyeballs in the dark kind of thing. You can't draw all this. And he just killed it. And I, for whatever reason, it may have just been the timing, it may have been whatever they were. It just, that was the end of the Ultimates in those days. And so, I wear that badge. And there's nothing I can do about it other than to say to people, it is there. It's not like I'm sitting there going, Oh, by the way, I want to go back and reinvent the past. No, it's on the last page of Ultimate X. Like she's standing there, and Quicksilver says, "This is my sister," and you go, "Okay, there's clearly more to this story," but we never got to tell that story. And so here's the quote: "No, Wanda and Quicksilver never had a relationship ever. They were brother and sister." So thanks, guys. Go home, relax, take my picture with has a dartboard on it. Down from there, I didn't do any of those things. Yes, I gave you a shock. That's what comics are supposed to do. You know, Superman died. That didn't mean that you went over to Dan Jurgens' house and blew it up. You know, you waited to see the rest of the story, and I am the only regret I have is that you didn't get to read. There you go.
Well, I think
There's a
that
scoop for you guys.
That is a mic drop right there.
It is, yeah. Well, and I think you have a really good point. Like you bring up, you compare it to the death of Superman in the 90s. I think it's just what internet culture did to the comic book discourse is, you know, people now had outlets to more than just theorize. They would had an outlet to complain about it, whereas, you know, in the 90s and obviously before that, you just had to sort of wait and see what came next. You weren't screaming into the internet void. You didn't have an audience to spread it to. So it's so unlike comic book fans to be impatient and not wait for things to play out.
You're mistaken, Jeph. You have no idea what you're talking about.
I had a great time with you guys today. Thank you.
No worries.